Welcome back to session number 3. So in the last session, we understood how we need to redefine the key metrics in supply chain in today's context. And we further understood how DDMRP has put a spotlight on boardroom discussions and some key decision making in context of supply chain and in terms of how S&OP has evolved over a period of time. And we got a sneak preview on how supply chains are going to evolve in future with DDMRP. So after clarifying some of the misperceived elements of demand-driven, let's kick off our third session titled Building Robust Supply Chains for the 21st Century. So maybe again, I'll start off with Carol. Carol, so demand-driven talks a lot about complex, adaptive systems, and you spoke about linearity in supply chains. So can you give a practical view of what this means in our supply chains, the linearity versus adaptiveness?
Well, and this is part of that evolution, Srini, of supply chain management. Back when I first joined the Apex organization, there was no term called supply chain management. We were in operations. When you look at Apex, it was originally founded as the American Production and Inventory Control Society. We focused on production and inventory control. So when you look at production is a linear system. It's got an input, got a process, got an output. Well, then we said, there's more to this. We've got a customer and we got a supplier. Well, what if we went from the customer's customer to the supplier's supplier? So like, supply chain, right? And that's how it got its name. But what's the problem? Is supply chains are not changed. They never have been changed. They've always been this complex network of interconnectability and linkages and networks, right? So that's a problem, is when we take tools that were designed to run something that's linear, and we now try to apply them to run something that's nonlinear. For example, a linear system can be optimized because it stays in steady state and you can optimize it. You can sort of say, okay, between these two positions, here's your optimal position. Well, the problem with the supply chain and nonlinear systems, they don't stay in any steady state too long. So therefore, mathematically, they could never be optimized. This is why advanced planning and scheduling never really has worked, because you cannot optimize a nonlinear system. So a linear system is understood by breaking it up into little pieces, and the whole is the sum of the pieces. A nonlinear system, as soon as we cut apart those connections, we've lost relevance. So it's understood by understanding the connection. So demand-driven was built as a system. So now, what makes it? I can't optimize it, but what can I do? How does a complex adaptive system learn? It learns through a series of 3 steps, which there's an emergence of ideas, there's a selection, and a feedback loop. And this is in biology. I mean, you look in Africa. Let's go back to Steve's home country of Africa. You see the giraffes with big long necks. You say, well, how come giraffes got big long necks? Well, it isn't because an animal said, hey, you know what? If I grow a really long neck, I can eat the leaves off the top of the tree. What happened is there was mutations. Something had a longer neck, they survived, shorter necks didn't. So they were competing. They were competing for the same food source. So what happened is those animals survived. Nature's pretty brutal about what survives and what doesn't. So that's a complex adaptive system, an emergence, a selection, and a feedback loop. And demand-driven is based on those same 2 cycles. From a strategic, there's an emergence of ideas, selected in the tactical bidirectional reconciliation called DDMRP, and then a feedback loop that comes back. So that's the strategic adaptive loop. Then we also have the tactical adaptive loop, where it comes from DDSNOP, a tactical bidirectional reconciliation, to operations. So based on this, we have an emergence, selection of what works in operations, and a feedback coming back using process flow metrics. That's why we need Six Sigma as part of this whole process back in. So 2 loops that are feeding into each other. So it works almost like an infinity loop. So you've got this emergence, selection, and feedback loop.
Wow. So it looks like demand-driven has some of the roots in Mother Nature as well. So that's a pretty interesting parallel that you drew, and really kind of cleared some of the doubts I had. So on that note, you're right. I mean, and and I can echo this from my implementations around complex optimizer systems. We could never get it across the planner communities. The calculations were so much cryptic within a black box. And in that context, I believe DDMRP seems to be so much intuitive. And in general, how do you see, Carol, in terms, the adoption of DDMRP, when you put in context with the complex optimizers that, a lot of companies seem to kind of, propose in supply chains?
Well, and I was there. I worked for a software company for a while. And planners are never going to trust something that comes out of a black box, period. End of story. Who's going to put their career on something that says, well, it's got to be right, it came out of the computer? Comes up with a different answer? DDMRP is highly visible. It's very intuitive. And you can check it with 5th grade math and a 4-function calculator. So the planners can see what the system is recommending to them, and they can take their calculator and they say, yep, that's exactly what I was expecting. I can validate that number. So everything is highly visible and relevant. And so planners like that. So they're not searching and trying to create all these Excel spreadsheets, trying to dig through all the rounding and data that we have, trying to search for that relevant information. It's presented to them, highly visible, very intuitive, easy to understand, and matches their intuition. So I think that's why the planners really have accepted it, because they just sort of go, yeah, why would you do it anywhere else?
Excellent. So looks like, Steve, have you also seen the DDMRP bring a lot of transparency into this whole planning process? How have you seen the adoption work out for DDMRP vis-a-vis optimizers?
Yeah, absolutely, Srini. So, I can't tell you how many large multinational organizations I've been to who have spent millions of dollars on the fanciest forecasting and APS systems, only to see planners scurrying away on the side on their Excel spreadsheets. And it's almost, Excel spreadsheet war, my number versus your number, after having sunk so much money into this. And we understand this with so many moving cogs and so many variables at play here. There's almost, almost an impossible, number of variables for the black box to get right. So no amount of time and optimization in that space is really going to get it right all the time. And therefore we see mass exodus out of APS tools and the likes into Excel spreadsheet where we can actually understand it. And therefore demand-driven has this high planner adoption, because we move out of that black box world into this very easy to understand sums model color-coded system that Carol was talking about. And these clear signals on top of a stable operating model just sort of grabs planners on a whole. And we start to see the shift away from these fancy tools and forecast designed for the forecast to be so accurate. And I recently read an article quoting the chief supply chain officer at Unilever, and he was quoted as saying during this COVID pandemic that agility does trump forecasting, he said. And at the end of the day, he's quoted saying that every dollar spent on agility has probably got a 10 times return on every dollar spent on forecasting and scenario planning. And we see that the agile supply chains, the clear signals within supply chains have really trumped in these times and in volatile times, which arguably is all the time, right? It's not just this COVID time, as opposed to the black box APS spitting out numbers we don't really trust.
Mm-hmm. So that's good. So Steve, talking about these tools, and these days AI/ML seems to be a shiny object every company wants to have. So Carol, in your experience, how have you seen AI/ML working complementary to DDMRP? Do these technologies work together? Do they complement each other, or where do you see DDMRP working in a new AI/ML world?
That's interesting you say that, because it's like the shiny bauble that everybody wants. I want a digital supply chain. And you go, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah.
The thing that's most exciting to me is artificial intelligence and machine learning. They are both based on the science of complex adaptive systems. All right, that is what it's all about. I had the opportunity to spend some time with the guy at IBM that's in charge of Watson, and in about 3 minutes, he understood what demand-driven was about. All I had to explain was that the emergent selection feedback and the operation, he was like, we can do that. I said, yes, you can. So it's that recognition of patterns and then making recommendations based on those patterns and understanding implications. If I make this choice, what happens over here? So the whole concept of artificial intelligence and machine learning is very exciting when you combine it with a demand-driven model, because what that allows us to do is it allows us to adapt that model more quickly. Now, it's not about getting more precise. Because planners can do a lot of this stuff manually, because remember, Six Sigma, SPC. But when you are trying to manage that many part numbers, how do you do that? So what artificial intelligence and machine learning do is it allows us to run through that analysis to see what those impediments to flow are. And we've seen some very exciting things come out of some very large software companies of capability around machine learning and artificial intelligence, things that are released in software today. And we've had the honor of seeing some things that they're working on. It's very, very exciting, because it's like a hand in the glove. We have the method, and now we have the technology that can do it. And the neat part is as Stephen said, it's highly visible, very intuitive. And so the planners are accepting it because it's not this black box. So the systems are giving them recommendations that the planners can say, yeah, I can see where that would be a better idea. That it's not this magic voodoo of, it runs on a computer, so it's got to be good. So I'm very excited. I've had lots of conversation with artificial intelligence and machine learning experts, and usually they have a hard time getting us support, because we get a little excited about, what's possible, how can you envision a supply chain in 3 dimensions, and yeah, we get really going on that. But the important thing is they share the same science, which is this idea of a complex adaptive system.
Excellent. So, talking about these systems. So, Steve, you have been a long-term practitioner, and we have seen organizations sometimes being very technology-oriented. They tend to spend inordinate amount of time and energy and resources around implementing and re-implementing tools, better tools. And in this context, how do you see DDMRP play out in terms of ease of implementation? And is process orientation more important than the tool for DDMRP to be successful?
That's a great question, Srini. I think, number one, because of the highly visual and simple approach to this, we tend to find that the systems are rapidly adopted and quickly adopted. It's easy to understand. You can do a 2-day demand-driven planner course, and you're equipped to go into all of the demand-driven tools that are out there that are certified by the Institute. Very easy to understand and very easy to know what to do. The second part of the question around, the process side of things is that I come from a strong process background, and I'm a huge fan of the process side of things. But really, first step for us in this journey is to really get that thoughtware right and the metrics right before we start touching processes. When we start to get our thinking to come into the systems approach, and we start to reward people to think like a system and rewarding like a system, that's when we start to see really step change improvements. And then from that perspective, we can then select and set up tools, and we can then start to align processes once that foundation is in place. Software absolutely has its place, and I've seen companies try to run demand-driven without changing their MRP or DRP. you just can't get it. You need a new DDMRP engine. You need a new DDMRP engine in this journey, but it's really about getting your people to understand, to be rewarded, and to be trained up into systems thinking before we start picking the next system and shiny tool.
Excellent. So it does appear to me that organizations need to have a certain goal, and in terms of DDMRP, and it has to be backed up with a proper plan, because if you have a goal without a plan, it just happens to be a wish, right? So makes sense. So as a conclusion, I would like to ask from both of you on what are the key messages and lessons learned that you would want our audience to kind of take with on DDMRP. Maybe we can start with Carol.
Well, to me, it's really 3 points. The first point is, and the most important, it's all about flow. Above all, it's all about flow. Second, roughly right is better than precisely wrong. And third is, there's no reason to wait. Methodology is understood. There's enough companies that have done it. The technology's there, and the assistance is there. So that would be my 3 key messages that I'd like people to remember.
Steve?
And then from our perspective, I think really it's what are you waiting for? We've talked at length about so many of the key components to this and what it looks like, but really try it. Go and take a pilot, do the sums. They're readily and openly available through the Demand-Driven Planner course. Set yourself up and you'll find that this is the most fun you'll have in planning. And you'll get results fast. You won't regret it.
Excellent. So good. So, with that, I can say that so many of our Infosys partners are embedded deep into the conventional wisdom of optimizing their supply chains. And they may find DDMRP to be provocative in a very positive sense. And I believe this session from Carol and Steve really helped us uncover and demystify DDMRP for us. And it seems to be something that needs to be part of every toolbox that organizations need to have, and to gain a greater control over their supply chains, essentially. So thanks, Stephen, to share some valuable insights in terms of our implementation experience, real-life experience. And Infosys happens to be very deeply invested in this space, and we are in close collaboration with DDI, and we hope to bring this work to our customers to bring a positive change in the supply chains and power their intelligent enterprise. So thank you, Carol and Stephen, again, and I hope the audience finds these insights that were discussed in the seminar to be very useful.